Brazil is not just another rapidly rising global power, it is a sleeping titan waiting to take control. Most Americans look south and see an absolutely unstoppable force. We picture infinite natural resources, massive agricultural harvests, and booming modern cities. But that glorious version of Brazil is a total illusion. The reality hidden beneath the surface is something else entirely. This immense country is actually held hostage by its geography. Nature never truly blessed this nation with boundless economic opportunity. It built a cage. Look closely at a world map. Let your eyes trace the borders of South America. There's a massive, unmistakable shape dominating the continent. It is a landmass of staggering, almost incomprehensible proportions. To truly grasp its sheer scale, look at your own backyard. Take the entire contiguous United States, stretch it from the rugged coastlines of California all the way to Maine. Drop that massive landmass directly over Brazil. You would still have plenty of room to spare. It is significantly larger than the lower 48 states combined. This vast territory spans across multiple time zones. It encompasses entire diverse climate systems within its borders. On paper, it is the ultimate geographic jackpot. It holds some of the largest concentrations of arable land globally. It sits quietly above colossal freshwater reserves. It contains endless untapped deposits of iron ore and rare minerals. The climate is incredibly forgiving in its deep agricultural heartlands. Farmers can pull 2 or 3 harvests from the soil every single year. By every conventional metric of geopolitical theory, this means absolute dominance. A nation of this immense size should naturally rule. It has the perfect blueprint of a modern superpower. It possesses all the raw materials required to dictate global markets. It should function as an impenetrable economic fortress. It should project military and economic power effortlessly across the oceans. It should stand as the unrivaled hegemon of the Southern Hemisphere. It should easily match the geopolitical weight of the United States. Yet history tells a very different, frustrating story. This powerful agricultural engine actively feeds billions of people worldwide. It sits on natural wealth that easily dwarfs ancient empires, but this giant remains severely and strangely constrained. It is caught in a perpetual, exhausting cycle. It is always emerging as a global power but never truly arriving. It faces constant, invisible internal friction every single day. It bears crushing logistical burdens just to keep its economy breathing. So how does a nation with more usable territory than the United States fail to dominate the global stage? The answer does not lie in modern, shifting politics. It cannot be blamed simply on human error or widespread corruption. It is not about unlucky historical accidents or colonial pasts. The brutal truth is written directly into the earth itself. People usually look at a flat map and see only borders. They see sheer size and immediately assume absolute power. They calculate total square mileage and expect inevitable massive wealth. But a two-dimensional map is a very dangerous illusion. It completely hides the vertical violence of the actual terrain. It obscures the invisible friction of the physical land. It dictates exactly how human beings can move. It controls how efficiently they can build, trade, and survive. Geopolitical power requires much more than simply possessing resources underground. True global power requires constant fluid movement. You must be able to move resources cheaply and efficiently. They must travel from the deep, isolated interior to the open ocean. A superpower must have a naturally connecting geography. It needs a physical landscape that facilitates rapid, easy integration. The United States was uniquely gifted with flat, sprawling plains. It has gentle slopes and river systems that invite endless trade. Brazil was handed a stunningly beautiful but incredibly hostile environment. Its geography is fundamentally broken for the purpose of nation building. The natural features simply do not cooperate with human ambition. They actively and relentlessly resist human progress at every turn. The sheer scale looks like a massive blessing from space. Down on the ground, it transforms into a severe logistical nightmare. The immense, unforgiving distances severely dilute the power of the state. The true wealth of the nation is buried deep inland. It remains physically isolated from the lucrative global supply chains. The vast majority of the population is confined strictly to the coastal edges. They are forcefully separated from the economic core by brutal topography. The land itself is deeply and permanently fractured. The nation fights a constant, exhausting war against its own environment. The giant is not resting. This country is a prisoner. To understand the absolute severity of Brazil's geographic trap, we first must look at what a perfect geographic cheat code actually looks like. Imagine stepping onto the vast, endlessly flat agricultural plains of the American Midwest on a crisp autumn morning. Meet John, a 45-year-old third-generation soybean farmer who tends to thousands of acres in the heart of Iowa. When John looks out over his sprawling property, he does not see a hostile environment fighting against his daily survival. He sees an incredibly forgiving landscape that has been naturally optimized for maximum human prosperity and effortless agricultural dominance. The rich, dark topsoil beneath his boots is virtually completely unobstructed by harsh geological formations or impassable terrain. His massive combine harvesters can roll continuously across the horizon in perfectly straight lines without ever breaking a sweat. This is not just a farm, but rather a beautifully synchronized outdoor factory built on a naturally flat foundation. The earth here does not resist the heavy machinery, but instead seems to actively welcome the massive wheels of modern agriculture. John's yield is incredibly high, but harvesting the crops is only the very first small step in the actual game of global economics. The true superpower of this specific American landscape reveals itself the moment those harvested soybeans need to leave the immediate property. Once the grain trucks are fully loaded, they merely have to roll down a gently sloping, perfectly paved local highway. Within a matter of a few short miles, they arrive easily at a towering local grain elevator positioned strategically right by the water. There are no terrifying mountain passes to navigate, and there are absolutely no crumbling dirt roads threatening to destroy the vehicle axles. Everything about the local topography facilitates a remarkably smooth, entirely predictable, and wonderfully cheap transfer of massive physical weight. This is where John plugs his harvest directly into the greatest natural geographic advantage the United States has ever possessed. The grain pours effortlessly from the storage elevators directly down into the waiting, cavernous steel bellies of massive river barges. These flat-bottomed vessels are sitting quietly on the calm, steadily flowing waters of the mighty Mississippi River system. This incredibly vast network of interconnected navigable waterways is essentially an infinite, completely free conveyor belt provided directly by Mother Nature herself. It effortlessly connects the deepest, most isolated agricultural heartlands of the North American continent directly to the open ocean. When the barges are finally tied together into massive floating islands of agricultural wealth, the real magic of this geography truly begins. A single, modestly powered towboat can easily push tens of thousands of tons of John's soybeans slowly downstream with barely any friction. The river current does the vast majority of the heavy lifting, pulling the massive cargo southward toward the global markets. As the barges drift peacefully past the borders of Missouri, Tennessee, and Arkansas, the river simply grows wider and more accommodating. There are no sudden, violent waterfalls, and there are no impenetrable canyons forcing the cargo back onto expensive trucks or trains. The water simply flows steadily downhill, carrying the economic lifeblood of the nation on a gentle, uninterrupted liquid highway. This waterborne journey represents pennies on the dollar compared to any other conceivable method of moving heavy physical goods across a massive continent. John is fast asleep in his comfortable farmhouse bed in Iowa, while his massive harvest continues its relentless, frictionless journey southward. He does not have to worry about exorbitant fuel costs, shredded truck tires, or unpredictable weather destroying treacherous mountain highways. Days later, the massive barges arrive safely at the sprawling, heavily industrialized deep-water ports located down in the Gulf of Mexico. Here, the soybeans are quickly and efficiently transferred from the humble river barges straight into the massive holds of ocean-going international freighters. From the very moment the seed was planted in the Iowa soil to the exact second it departed for foreign markets, the land cooperated. The United States became an unparalleled agricultural and economic superpower because its internal geography actively subsidized the cost of doing business. John is undoubtedly a remarkably hardworking and highly skilled farmer, but his incredible economic efficiency is ultimately underwritten by the river. He is playing an incredibly competitive global economic game on a geographic board that is fundamentally rigged in his absolute favor. But if you travel thousands of miles southward to the rising agricultural heart of the South American continent, the rules change entirely. To reach the unseen Brazil, you have to leave this effortless harmony behind and enter a world where nature fights back. But this is not America. This is the state of Mato Grosso. It lies deep within the vast Brazilian interior. Meet Carlos. He is also 45 years old. He also farms thousands of acres of soybeans. The soil here is incredibly rich and deep. The tropical climate is absolutely relentless and powerful. Carlos works tirelessly from dawn until dusk. Nature provides him with incredible, unparalleled growing conditions. His land produces truly staggering agricultural yields. He often manages 3 full harvests every single year. His production numbers completely destroy John's records in Iowa. Carlos is an absolute master of modern farming. On paper, he is an incredibly wealthy man. On paper, he dominates the global agricultural market. But paper does not move heavy physical cargo. The moment the massive harvest ends, the nightmare begins. There is no gently flowing river waiting nearby. There are no massive steel barges sitting quietly. The magic geographic cheat code simply does not exist here. The mighty Amazon River flows in the complete wrong direction. Carlos must rely entirely on heavy diesel trucks. He loads his massive crop into these steel beasts. Heavy 18-wheelers groan loudly under the extreme weight. They pull slowly out onto the local roads. There is no smooth asphalt waiting for their tires. There is only raw, unforgiving, heavily rutted red dirt. The long journey to the sea finally begins. It will not be a peaceful, quiet float southward. It will be a brutal, agonizing, extremely expensive war. The trucks merge onto the notorious interior highways. They must travel south toward the distant Atlantic Ocean. The deep water port of Santos is incredibly far away. It is a grueling 1,000-mile land journey. In the dry season, the red dust is entirely blinding. It violently chokes the massive diesel truck engines in the wet season. The reality is far more terrifying. The heavy tropical rains simply erase the dirt roads. The earth turns into deep, incredibly sticky mud. Massive convoys of heavy trucks sink directly into the ground. Thousands of vehicles are funneled onto a single failing route. Traffic jams stretch out for dozens of miles. Drivers are trapped for days in the steaming jungle. Geography physically holds the valuable cargo hostage. The land actively fights back against the machines. John's crop floated effortlessly while he slept comfortably. Carlos's crop must violently fight for every single inch. The trucks bounce terribly over massive vehicle-destroying craters. Thick rubber tires shred constantly on sharp, jagged rocks. Heavy metal suspensions snap entirely under the relentless pounding. The exhausted truck drivers sleep in their violently shaking cabs. They face incredible physical dangers on these desolate, lonely routes. Diesel fuel burns at an absolutely terrifying, unsustainable rate. Moving heavy cargo 1,000 miles on dirt consumes massive energy. The mechanical wear and tear is truly catastrophic. Every single mile traveled is a massive physical struggle. The natural environment is openly and constantly hostile. This is not a modern logistics network. This is pure, unadulterated survival. Every single bump in the dirt road steals money. Every blown truck tire eats directly into the profit. Carlos pays dearly for every single mile his crop travels. He pays in highly taxed, incredibly expensive fuel. He pays in constant, extremely heavy mechanical vehicle repairs. He pays in lost, incredibly valuable market time. His unparalleled agricultural efficiency means absolutely nothing right now. The land simply devours his hard-earned profit margin. The harsh geography acts exactly like a massive hidden tax. It severely punishes him for living in the deep interior. John competes fairly against other local American farmers. Carlos competes daily against his own brutal geography. The economic fight is incredibly unbalanced and totally unfair. The land always takes its very heavy, undeniable cut. After days of brutal driving, the coast finally appears. The open ocean is tantalizingly close right now, but the grueling journey is still not completely over. The land has one final, truly terrifying trap waiting. A massive wall of solid rock suddenly appears ahead. It completely blocks all easy, flat access to the sea. The coastal mountain range stands like a giant stone fortress. The heavy trucks must completely conquer this steep descent. Massive engines scream loudly in very low, desperate gears. Brakes smoke heavily under the extreme constant physical pressure. It is a slow, deeply dangerous, utterly agonizing crawl. The giant trucks slowly inch toward the crowded port below. One mistake on this mountain means total, fatal disaster. The geography demands maximum effort until the very bitter end. The soybeans finally reach the waiting international cargo ship. They are exactly the same high quality as John's crops. But the unseen human and financial cost to get them here was astronomical. Carlos successfully grew the best agricultural products on Earth, yet his own geography made him bleed heavily to sell them. He works twice as hard just to break even financially. The vastness of his country provides incredible, undeniable resources, but that exact same vastness physically traps that wealth inland. The immense size of the nation is a terrible illusion. It is a giant, inescapable cage disguised as a superpower. The soil generously gave him everything he could ever want. The terrain violently took it all right back away. Look closely at the eastern edge of the North American continent. The transition from the deep Atlantic Ocean to the vast continental interior is remarkably gentle. A massive, incredibly flat coastal plain stretches endlessly inland for hundreds of miles before hitting any serious elevation. This forgiving flat earth allowed early American settlers to effortlessly push their ambitions westward. It later permitted modern engineers to lay tens of thousands of miles of incredibly cheap, perfectly straight steel rail tracks directly to the deep water. Major port cities naturally integrated with their deep, resource-rich agricultural hinterlands without facing any severe geological resistance. The physical geography of the United States practically begged human civilization to connect the interior wealth directly with the global ocean trade routes. The physical terrain served as a permanent welcoming mat for unparalleled, frictionless economic expansion. The land was ready to be conquered and capitalized upon from the very beginning. Now shift your gaze far south to the sprawling Brazilian coastline. Approach this massive tropical country from the exact same Atlantic Ocean. There is absolutely no welcoming coastal plain waiting patiently to greet you. The transition from the ocean water to the continental landmass is not a gentle, inviting slope. It is a sudden, violently abrupt geological collision. A colossal, towering mountain range abruptly rises, almost straight out of the crashing waves. This imposing geographical feature is the Serra d'Uma. It is a massive, unforgiving geological formation globally recognized as the Great Escarpment. It acts as an immense, seemingly impenetrable physical barricade stretching relentlessly along the eastern seaboard for thousands of miles. The world-famous, beautiful sandy beaches immediately smash into towering, dark, jungle-draped cliffs that pierce the clouds. The land simply does not invite you inside to explore its hidden riches. It aggressively and permanently pushes you right back into the sea. This breathtaking vertical terrain creates a permanent, inescapable developmental nightmare for the entire nation. Geopolitical analysts and global financial institutions have studied this precise geological barrier for decades. Their stark conclusions point to a brutally grim economic reality. Building heavy, reliable transport infrastructure across this sheer vertical drop is almost financially impossible. Laying efficient, high-capacity freight railway tracks up a 1,000-meter vertical cliff face requires astronomical, state-draining engineering budgets. Constructing wide, modern commercial highways through this dense, unstable mountain rock demands perpetual, massive financial maintenance just to prevent total collapse. The Great Escarpment effectively and ruthlessly amputates the wealthy, highly productive agricultural interior from the vital, life-giving ocean ports. It forces the entire modern national economy to rely on a terrifyingly fragile, highly dangerous network of steep, twisting mountain roads. The geography actively and relentlessly punishes any human attempt to physically unify the country. The state bleeds massive capital simply trying to punch tiny holes through this solid rock. If you're still watching this, you're already part of the rare few who want to understand much more than just surface-level economics. You are finally beginning to see the invisible, ancient geographical chains completely binding a modern titan. This towering coastal mountain range is not merely a beautiful, exotic, scenic backdrop designed for international tourists. It is the very first formidable physical layer of the geographic trap holding the entire Brazilian economy completely hostage. It rigidly dictates exactly where major cities can safely grow and where national wealth must relentlessly burn. Every single ounce of precious national export must violently wrestle with this ancient stone giant just to reach a cargo ship. The nation is completely and permanently barricaded from its own ultimate economic salvation by the very earth it sits upon. The Atlantic coast is not a gateway, it is a prison wall. Because the towering coastal escarpment permanently blocks the construction of cheap, efficient freight rail networks, the country is violently forced into a corner. It must rely entirely on its vulnerable roads. In the American business world, major corporations deeply understand the basic concept of a logistics premium. We easily recognize the hidden tax of shipping heavy commercial goods across the treacherous Rocky Mountains or navigating complex supply chains during severe Midwestern winter storms. We quickly factor these temporary physical obstacles directly into the final consumer price tag. But in South America's largest and most resource-rich economy, this logistics premium has severely mutated into a permanent, crushing macroeconomic condition. It is a universally recognized financial phenomenon with an official, highly feared name. It is widely known as the Custo Brasil, or simply the Brazil cost. It is the invisible astronomical price tag attached to absolutely every single commercial transaction, newly harvested product, and physical movement within the national borders. It acts as a suffocating, incredibly heavy economic blanket. It ruthlessly destroys international market competitiveness long before a product ever leaves the local factory floor. What exactly fuels this massive, unavoidable hidden tax that constantly drains the nation? It is not simply frustrating bureaucratic red tape or unusually high corporate taxes, though those certainly exist in extreme abundance. The true terrifying monster quietly devouring the national wealth is the brutal physical movement of physical goods. Comprehensive macroeconomic assessments published by the World Bank in late 2024 and the Boston Consulting Group in late 2025 reveal a truly staggering, deeply concerning reality. A massive 68% of this universally dreaded Custo Brasil originates directly from one single, inescapable source. It comes purely from devastatingly inefficient, highly expensive logistics. When a massive nation is completely barricaded from building cheap, heavy rail access to the ocean, it has only one desperate alternative left. It must put absolutely everything on the weary backs of heavy diesel trucks. Millions of exhaust-spewing commercial trucks carry the entire weight of the national economy every single day. They serve as the only fragile, incredibly expensive lifeline connecting the deep interior wealth to the global market. But the physical infrastructure desperately supporting this massive trucking armada is fundamentally, geographically broken. Imagine trying to run the entire modern American economy, attempting to smoothly move every single piece of Midwestern grain and Californian technology without the paved interstate highway system. That is the daily grueling Brazilian reality. Across this immense continental giant, only about 18% of the entire national road network is actually paved with solid asphalt. This shocking statistic represents roughly half of the standard global average for basic road development. The vast, overwhelming majority of the massive country is connected only by raw, unpredictable, and highly destructive red dirt. These unpaved national arteries remain completely at the mercy of the violent, unforgiving tropical climate. They dissolve instantly into impassable, deep red mud during the heavy, relentless rainy season. They quickly turn into blinding, engine-destroying dust bowls during the brutal, scorching dry months. The sheer mechanical destruction constantly inflicted upon the national trucking fleet is almost mathematically impossible to fully calculate. Every single massive pothole, every violently washed-out dirt bridge, and every crippling rural traffic jam acts as a direct, heavy financial tax on the nation. It forces local companies to maintain massive, incredibly expensive backup inventories just to survive inevitable severe supply chain interruptions. It ultimately forces international buyers to pay a steep, unreasonable premium for these goods, or simply look elsewhere entirely to fulfill their massive orders. The great escarpment and the vast unpaved interior work perfectly together to slowly bleed the national economy completely dry. The ambitious nation produces extraordinary world-class physical wealth from its rich soil, but it immediately expends a huge fraction of that exact same wealth simply trying to move it forward. This is the brutal, undeniable mathematics of geographic determinism playing out in devastating real time. It is a vicious, endless cycle of immense agricultural production violently clashing with impossible physical transportation. So what does this crushing, abstract macroeconomic burden actually look like when you put it directly behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler? Let us follow the exact path of a single, fully loaded diesel truck departing from a massive farm in the distant interior. The driver's name is Roberto. He is a hardened veteran of the infamous Brazilian highways. He grips the heavy steering wheel as the massive engine roars to life. Behind him sits nearly 40 tons of newly harvested, extremely valuable export soybeans. His ultimate destination is the massive, heavily congested global shipping port of Santos. This journey is roughly equivalent to driving a heavily loaded semi-truck from Chicago straight down to New Orleans. But Roberto will not be cruising down a beautifully paved, multi-lane American interstate highway system. This is not a standard commercial drive. It is a brutal, agonizing battle for basic mechanical and physical survival. The very first few hundred miles are a violent, teeth-rattling nightmare. The unpaved red dirt road heavily, deeply cratered with massive, suspension-destroying holes. Roberto's massive truck violently bounces and violently sways with every single grueling mile. The thick tropical dust instantly coats the windshield in a blinding red film. Heavy, jagged rocks constantly threaten to completely shred his expensive, thick rubber tires. Every single blown tire costs him hundreds of hard-earned American dollars instantly. The constant extreme physical vibration slowly tears the actual metal frame of the vehicle apart. He is forced to drive at an agonizingly slow, incredibly inefficient physical crawl. A journey that should theoretically take a single day easily stretches into 3 or 4 exhausting days. He burns through massive, expensive quantities of highly taxed diesel fuel just fighting the raw terrain. In American terms, the sheer fuel cost alone for this single brutal trip easily exceeds $1,000. That is money burned directly into the atmosphere simply because the geography is hostile. But the dirt roads are only the first part of this agonizing slow-motion mechanical torture. As Roberto finally approaches the distant eastern coastline, the dreaded coastal escarpment suddenly looms ahead. The Serra do Mar stands like a massive, impenetrable stone wall blocking his only exit. The traffic here quickly condenses into a massive, heavily polluting, terrifyingly slow metallic snake. Thousands of equally heavy, fully loaded trucks are forced onto just a few extremely steep winding mountain passes. The massive diesel engines scream loudly in the lowest possible gears as they slowly fight the extreme gravity. The air is thick with the acrid choking smell of violently burning brake pads. One minor mechanical failure on this incredibly steep, unforgiving slope means sudden, absolute disaster. This is the exact physical bottleneck where the national economy effectively chokes. When Roberto finally navigates the treacherous mountain descent, the nightmare still continues. He enters the sprawling, incredibly chaotic urban labyrinth completely surrounding the massive port of Santos. He must wait in heavily congested, miles-long lines just to finally unload his precious cargo. The entire exhausting, highly dangerous journey has easily taken him more than a full week to complete. He is physically broken, mentally exhausted, and his truck requires massive, highly expensive mechanical repairs. By the time those soybeans are finally poured into the deep belly of an ocean freighter, the raw mathematics are absolutely devastating. In the United States, John paid maybe $20 to $30 a ton to effortlessly float his crop down the Mississippi River. Roberto's grueling, highly dangerous overland journey easily cost him well over $100 per ton. The exact same high-quality agricultural product now carries a massive, inescapable geographic penalty. This incredibly massive cost difference entirely explains the true brutal nature of the Custo Brazil. It completely erases the massive agricultural advantage the nation gains from its deeply fertile soil. The invisible hand of geography forces this country to run a marathon while wearing heavy lead boots. This is not a temporary logistical hurdle. It is a permanent structural defect built directly into the very bedrock of the entire continent. The land itself acts exactly like a massive, incredibly greedy middleman, constantly taking its huge cut. Every single time a truck leaves a farm, the exact same exhausting, highly expensive battle is fought and lost. But this constant brutal reliance on heavily destructive road transport inevitably raises a very simple, extremely logical question. Why fight this grueling, highly expensive ground war when you have so much water? So why completely rely on such a vulnerable, incredibly expensive trucking network when you have an abundance of water? If you briefly glance at a standard topological map of the South American continent, you will see a massive, deeply intricate network of blue lines. Brazil actually possesses one of the most extensive, naturally voluminous river systems on the entire planet. It seems entirely logical to assume these massive rivers could easily replace the terrible dirt roads. They should logically function as the exact same cheap, efficient natural conveyor belts that made the United States an economic powerhouse. They should effortlessly carry millions of tons of agricultural and mineral wealth directly from the deep interior straight to the Atlantic coast. But once again, the physical geography plays a cruel, mathematically impossible joke on human ambition. The visual map is incredibly deceiving because it completely hides the true direction of the physical gravity. This brings us to the second devastating layer of the geographic trap. The rivers are massive, but they flow exactly where the country does not need them to go. The brutal reality of the Serra do Mar escarpment does much more than just block railway construction. It fundamentally alters the entire continental drainage system in a deeply problematic way. Because this massive stone wall rises so abruptly along the eastern coast, it creates a massive continental divide right next to the ocean. The heavy tropical rains that fall just a few miles inland do not naturally flow eastward down the short, steep cliffs into the Atlantic. Instead, the entire landmass tilts gently backwards, directly away from the crucial eastern seaports. This means that the vast majority of the rivers originating in the highly productive agricultural and economic heartlands are physically forced to flow westward, deep into the isolated interior. They carry their massive volume of water completely away from the heavily populated coast where the deep water ports actually exist. This incredible geographic irony completely neutralizes the theoretical advantage of having so much fresh water. It forces the nation to desperately fight against the natural water currents rather than utilizing them for cheap, efficient global trade. When these major inland rivers finally manage to turn and find a path toward the ocean, they do not help the Brazilian economy. The massive Paraná River system, which naturally drains much of the highly productive southern agricultural zones, eventually flows southward. It steadily carries its immense volume of water completely out of Brazilian sovereign territory altogether. It flows directly through neighboring Paraguay and Argentina before finally spilling into the Atlantic Ocean far to the south. The natural water highways that should theoretically connect Brazilian farms to Brazilian ports instead deliver that potential connection directly to rival nations. The Geographic actively steals the logistical advantage and freely hands it to geopolitical competitors. This is the ultimate, incredibly frustrating paradox of the Brazilian river system. The nation has an overwhelming abundance of navigable water, but it is physically organized in the most economically useless configuration imaginable. The rivers flow backward, and the economic potential simply drains away. If you are still with us, you are already seeing the invisible forces that silently shape global superpowers. You understand that physical geography is never just passive scenery. It is an active, demanding player in international relations. When your primary natural transportation network physically leaves your sovereign territory, it ceases to be merely a logistical problem. It instantly transforms into a permanent, highly complex, and deeply frustrating geopolitical vulnerability. To truly grasp the strategic severity of this situation, we must return to the American comparison. Imagine for a moment that the mighty Mississippi River did not gently empty into the Gulf of Mexico near New Orleans. Imagine instead that it forcefully altered its course southward, crossing directly over the international border into sovereign Mexican territory. Every single American farmer from Ohio to Nebraska would be completely dependent on a foreign government to export their crops. The United States would lose absolute, unquestioned control over its own internal economic destiny. It would be forced to constantly negotiate, compromise, and fundamentally alter its foreign policy just to survive. This theoretical American nightmare is the exact daily geopolitical reality for the Brazilian government. The massive Paraná River system, carrying the immense agricultural potential of the deep southern states, flows directly out of the country. It empties into the Rio de la Plata estuary, an incredibly strategic waterway completely controlled by neighboring Argentina and Uruguay. This geographical twist means Brazil can never truly act with the unchecked, unilateral confidence of an isolated superpower. It must permanently maintain incredibly delicate, highly sensitive diplomatic relationships with nations that theoretically should be its junior partners. If historical tensions were to severely escalate, those downstream nations could theoretically block or heavily tax Brazilian agricultural exports. They hold a permanent, natural chokehold over a significant portion of the Brazilian economic engine. This geographical vulnerability fundamentally forces a much more cautious, cooperative, and restrained approach to continental foreign policy. The giant is physically tethered to its neighbors, unable to fully exert its massive theoretical weight without risking its own lifelines. This physical dependence creates a constant, low-level strategic anxiety deep within the halls of the capital, Brasilia. The government must continuously invest heavy political capital simply to ensure the uninterrupted flow of its own internal commerce. It must build and maintain complex multinational treaties to govern water usage, hydroelectric power generation, and unhindered navigation rights. The immense natural energy potential of these rivers is also heavily shared, most notably at the colossal Itaipu Dam. This massive engineering marvel sits precisely on the border with Paraguay, tightly intertwining the energy security of both nations. The geography absolutely refuses to allow Brazil to function as a completely self-sufficient, fiercely independent continental island. It forces deep integration, but an integration born fundamentally out of geographical weakness rather than pure, unchecked political strength. The land demands constant compromise, permanently preventing the unbridled projection of power that typically defines a true global hegemon. This southern isolation is a quiet, ongoing diplomatic chess match played entirely on a board designed by nature. It is a stark reminder that sheer landmass does not automatically translate into absolute geopolitical freedom. The giant is heavily constrained not just by the brutal mountains, but by the very direction the water chooses to flow. It must constantly look over its shoulder, forever mindful of the nations that control its access to the open sea. But the southern rivers and the eastern escarpment are only the first two layers of this massive geographic trap. To truly understand the absolute limits of this nation, we must travel far from the bustling agricultural heartlands. We must go deep into the very core of the continent, into a region that the world deeply misunderstands, because the final and perhaps most devastating barrier to true national integration lies in the extreme north. To reach the unseen Brazil, you have to leave the south entirely. We must travel thousands of miles northward, far beyond the bustling coastal cities and the sprawling agricultural plains. We are entering the extreme, isolated northern half of the country. This is where the most famous, globally recognized feature of the entire continent dominates the map. The massive Amazon basin covers an area so unimaginably large, it creates its own distinct weather systems. When most people look at this sprawling green expanse, they see pure, untapped potential. They imagine a pristine frontier waiting to be responsibly integrated into the modern national economy. But that romantic vision of the rainforest is completely false. The real Amazon is something else entirely. It is not an economic resource waiting to be gently harnessed. It is an impenetrable, violently hostile fortress of raw power. The sheer physical scale of the Amazon actively defies all standard human engineering. The towering trees and dense vegetation are not the primary insurmountable obstacles here. The true terrifying enemy of modern infrastructure lies hidden deep underground. The soil composition throughout this massive region is fundamentally disastrously weak. Deep, spongy humus layers and constantly shifting mud completely dominate the subterranean landscape. This incredibly unstable foundation actively swallows any attempt to lay permanent, heavy concrete or asphalt. Heavy tropical rains relentlessly flood the region for nearly half of the entire year. The massive river swells unpredictably, violently washing away temporary roads and fragile bridges without warning. Recent logistical analyses clearly confirm this terrifying geographical reality. The Amazon is an absolutely insurmountable natural barrier against any permanent high-capacity ground transportation network. The land physically rejects human permanence. It refuses to hold the weight of modern civilization. This creates a truly massive, terrifying geographical paradox for the entire nation. The mighty Amazon River itself, the largest single body of flowing freshwater on the planet, offers incredible navigational potential. But just like the southern rivers, it completely betrays the core economic needs of the state. The massive Amazon system flows resolutely northward and eastward, emptying directly into the deep equatorial Atlantic. It completely isolates itself from the vital economic and agricultural centers located thousands of miles to the south. The river system cannot physically connect the heavily populated, highly productive regions to the distant northern frontier. The vast northern territory remains effectively amputated from the rest of the physical nation. The Amazon does not unify this giant country. It ruthlessly and permanently cuts it entirely in half. When humans look deeply into the dense, sprawling canopy of the Amazon, they usually see a vibrant, thriving ecosystem overflowing with life. But when infrastructure engineers look at that exact same landscape, they see only a terrifying, incredibly hostile void. This massive region is frequently and accurately referred to by logistical experts as the Green Desert. It is not a desert because it lacks water. It is a desert because it absolutely lacks the fundamental geological stability required to support heavy, modern human ambition. The soil here, heavily leached by millennia of violent tropical rain, is surprisingly poor in deep agricultural nutrients. Once the ancient protective tree cover is stripped away, the fragile earth rapidly degrades under the punishing equatorial sun. It hardens into a dense, useless, brick-like substance that violently rejects any large-scale sustainable industrial farming. The land gives the visual illusion of infinite fertility, but it ruthlessly denies actual long-term human cultivation. This is the ultimate deception of the rainforest. The state has repeatedly tried to conquer this massive green wall throughout modern history. Ambitious governments have poured billions of dollars into aggressively carving massive, straight highways directly through the dense jungle. They envisioned a heavily populated, fully integrated northern frontier, perfectly connected to the wealthy southern markets. But nature here operates on a completely different, much more violent timeline. The jungle does not patiently tolerate human intrusion. It actively and aggressively reclaims its territory the exact moment the heavy machinery stops moving. Intense humidity rots heavy steel bridges with terrifying speed. Aggressive, fast-growing vegetation shatters expensive asphalt within months of it being laid down. Relentless torrential seasonal floods simply erase entire stretches of newly built highway, washing millions of dollars directly into the muddy river. The government can carve the road, but it cannot ever force the road to stay. This is not a temporary logistical delay or a problem that can simply be solved with more federal money. This is a permanent, ongoing war against a physically superior, absolutely relentless environmental force. The Amazon is a living, breathing barrier that actively repairs itself whenever humans attempt to cut through it. The cost of perpetually fighting back the jungle simply to maintain basic road access is economically unsustainable. It creates a massive permanent black hole in the national budget. The nation is forced to constantly spend enormous wealth just to stand perfectly still in the deep mud. The few people who do live and work in these deeply isolated northern regions understand this harsh reality intimately. They rely on incredibly slow, highly inefficient river barges or terribly expensive small aircraft simply to survive. This is not modern economic development. It is basic, raw survival. The Green Desert completely guarantees that the northern half of the country will never truly integrate with the south. It permanently caps the total usable landmass of the entire nation, regardless of what the borders on a map say. The giant is effectively trapped entirely within the lower half of its own massive body. The sheer physical size of the Amazon is not a geopolitical asset, it is a colossal, suffocating liability that constantly drains the energy and resources of the state. Every single attempt to completely tame this environment has ultimately ended in exactly the same way. The massive infrastructure slowly crumbles, the dense jungle quietly returns, nature remembers. The environment is completely unforgiving. The natural world always inevitably wins. When you step back and observe these massive geographical barricades all together, a deeply sobering picture of the nation finally emerges. The sheer verticality of the Great Escarpment constantly blocks the critical eastern access to the global oceans. The incredibly vast, brutally unpaved interior forcefully imposes the crushing, inescapable hidden tax of the Costa Brazil. The mighty southern river systems completely bypass the national ports and deliver their immense power directly to foreign competitors. The colossal, impenetrable green desert of the Amazon permanently amputates the entire northern half of the continental landmass. These are not merely isolated, random logistical challenges waiting patiently to be solved by clever modern engineering. They are a series of interconnected, highly coordinated geographical assaults on the very concept of national unity. They act together as a massive, naturally formed straitjacket, permanently wrapped around a rapidly growing giant. The physical land itself actively fights against the basic human desire to connect, trade, and ultimately prosper. If you are still here with us, then you're already part of the few who want more than just the surface. You now understand exactly why this massive country often feels so politically fractured and economically exhausted. The immense physical friction of the landscape inevitably bleeds directly into the daily psychology of the entire nation. It breeds a deep, underlying sense of regional isolation and a constant, quiet frustration with the distant central government. The wealthy, highly developed southern states often feel completely disconnected from the struggles of the impoverished, isolated north. The ambitious interior agricultural heartlands feel constantly held hostage by the crowded, politically dominant coastal port cities. The state must continually expend massive, exhausting amounts of political and financial energy, simply keeping the country physically whole. This internal struggle completely drains the vital energy needed to forcefully project true global power outward. The giant is far too busy fighting itself simply to stand up straight. How do you truly unify a massive nation that its own natural environment actively wants to violently divide? This is the fundamental, agonizing question that has silently haunted every single government in the history of Brasilia. It forces political leaders into impossible, highly compromised choices between investing in deep social development or basic physical survival. The government cannot simply build a modern high-speed rail network connecting the entire country because the geography mathematically forbids it. It cannot easily exploit its own massive internal water networks because the rivers literally flow the wrong way. It must rely entirely on a terribly inefficient, highly polluting trucking industry, simply because there is absolutely no other choice. This geographical determinism forces a constant, exhausting pragmatism upon the entire national psyche. The grand, sweeping ambitions of becoming a dominant, unchallenged global superpower are constantly tempered by the brutal reality of the dirt. The nation is completely shaped by its own undeniable limitations. The geography dictates the politics. Geography is the ultimate silent dictator of human history. It simply does not care about our political ambitions. It completely ignores our grand economic plans and dreams. Flat maps deceive us with bright colors and borders. They show us massive shapes and falsely promise power. But the physical earth is incredibly cruel and unyielding. It creates invisible permanent cages that hold nations captive. Brazil stands as the ultimate proof of this reality. It is a nation blessed with infinite natural wealth, yet it remains permanently cursed by its own topography. The land generously gives life but violently refuses freedom. It dictates exactly what a developing country can become. It determines the absolute ceiling of modern human progress. No amount of federal money can flatten a mountain. No modern government can easily reverse a mighty river. We began this journey by looking at a titan. We imagined an unstoppable force of global agricultural dominance. We compared it directly to the vast American empire. On paper, the two massive nations look incredibly similar. Both are vast democracies spanning across multiple time zones. Both possess enough fertile soil to feed the globe. but their underlying physical foundations are completely fundamentally different. The United States won the ultimate global geographic lottery. Its internal land is beautifully flat, welcoming and connected. Its river systems act as free, massive conveyor belts. Brazil was handed a stunning but completely fragmented puzzle. Its beautiful exotic pieces were never designed to fit. The environment actively works against total national economic unity. It physically isolates the deep interior wealth from oceans. Think back to John on his flat Iowa farm. He plants his crops on perfectly compliant, yielding soil. He relies entirely on a gentle river for transport. His incredible financial success is underwritten by friendly nature. His natural environment actively wants him to become wealthy. Now remember Carlos, deep in the distant Mato Grosso, he fights a desperate, exhausting war every single day. He must conquer brutal dirt roads and towering cliffs. He bleeds heavy capital just to move his harvest. Both men are incredibly highly skilled and hard workers. Both men yield massive, valuable harvests from the earth. But only Carlos is fighting against the actual planet. Only his nation is heavily taxed by the terrain. John's geography acts as a powerful, invisible economic tailwind. Carlos's geography acts as a crushing, permanent physical headwind. This is the raw, undeniable tragedy of geographic determinism. A nation can possess absolutely everything it theoretically needs. It can have the fierce drive to conquer markets. But if the physical land resists, all progress stalls. The great escarpment will always stand like solid stone. The long interior dirt roads will always become mud. The massive southern rivers will always flow away south. The dense green desert will always reject human infrastructure. These are not temporary logistical hurdles waiting for technology. These are permanent, eternal conditions set in ancient stone. Human ambition can never truly reshape an entire continent. The country must constantly adapt to this massive trap. It must spend its energy simply surviving its geography. It cannot use that energy to truly dominate globally. The real Brazil is not a simple tropical postcard. It is not an effortless, booming modern economic miracle. The unseen Brazil is a powerful story of endurance. It is a massive nation locked in eternal struggle. It constantly wrestles with a brilliantly beautiful, hostile cage. It achieves global greatness despite its geography, not because every single export represents a massive, exhausting human victory. Every newly paved road is a bloody, hard-fought triumph. This is the harsh truth hidden beneath the green canopy. The sleeping titan is actually wide awake and fighting. It is just fighting heavy gravity, rock and water. It battles the earth every day just to stand. We have finally uncovered the invisible chains binding Brazil. We have seen exactly how geography dictates national destiny. But this beautiful, cruel trap is not uniquely Brazilian. Other massive nations fight their own invisible permanent borders. Some are locked in ice or surrounded by mountains. Tell us which country's geography we should decode next. India, Russia, China, or somewhere even more trapped.